This is our weekly webinar called Ask an Autistic. So every week I get together some amazing adults that live with autism to answer questions that parents have that someone that's like myself, who's a professional, may not be able to answer. I don't have firsthand experience living with autism. I can do all the education and studies in the world, and I can help you with a lot of things, but what I can't tell you is what it's like to live with autism. So here's your chance to ask autistic adults your questions. So I know we have a bunch of parents on. If anyone wants to unmute at this time and ask a question, you're welcome to ask a question to our panel.
Alrighty, I guess I'll go. Hey everybody, my name is Rich. I jump on every week as much as I can. And my question to the panel might be a little bit of a sensitive topic, but as I'm talking to my 5-year-old about the topics I'm about to bring up, it's something that I know that eventually I'm gonna have to talk to my 3-year-old as he gets older. My son is the one that was diagnosed with ASD. So I know eventually he's going to need to be made aware, but we just want to know pretty much more or less, me and my wife, how do we have that talk of stranger danger and more along the lines of just, hey, you know, these are your private parts. These are the parts that nobody's supposed to, you know, go near or so-and-so, or to disclose to mommy and daddy that something happened that wasn't supposed to. How can we go about that to make him understand? Because I think I saw Jesse saying at one of the panels saying that children with autism are more susceptible to abuse and the other type of abuse I won't mention because you know, we're on recording. But that's one of my biggest fears, is just that one day something was to happen or could have happened and my son doesn't know to disclose it. How do I talk to him about that when the time does come?
Yeah, Rich, that's a really good question. And so there are different curriculums that you can use to help children to become aware of their body parts. And that is something that the teachers should be doing in school as well. That's usually part of a curriculum. So typically speaking, as educators, we don't introduce that topic until kids are in their teenage years. And then you're really looking at it through health class and making kids aware of their body parts and making kids aware of like what private parts are versus, and like the idea that it's not okay for other people to touch your body parts. I actually do think it's a good idea to start doing that a little bit earlier, especially with a lot of what's coming to light in the world of like children being abused and that being more common, unfortunately, and us being more aware of it because people being willing to speak out more. So the best way from my professional perspective to do that would be to use what's called a social story. So a social story is it's a story that's designed to help to teach someone how to respond in a social situation. And there's years and years and years of research proving, dating back from like 1973 with Dr. Carla Gray. She's the one who initiated this specific type of story. It's written a very specific way. There's a lot of research to demonstrate that it works well for kids with autism to help them to learn how to respond in a social situation. And like I said, there are actual curriculums and books out there that you can use and you can access that'll help you to do that. And if anyone on the panel, so what we've been doing every week is just having everyone go one by one and give their input. So what we want to do is, because we want to be able to make more than one question get answered, if anyone on the panel has any input on this, then if you want to just let us know, unmute, and you can answer it. This is something, so Jeff, I know Jeff is raising his hand. So Jeff, what advice could you give Rich on this topic?
Well, one thing I would probably go through, I would probably understand the basics of who's a good person, who is a bad person. And just remember, you know, that it's always important to teach the kid, it's always important to teach kids who you should stay in a certain area. Like for example, at the park, you know, stay in an area where mommy and daddy are watching you, because there could be there could be a bad person walking around, and he could be, you know, looking to capture you or to take you away from mommy and daddy. And that's some, and the other thing I would recommend also is to teach, when you are approached by a stranger, just would always say no. Teach them to say no. And there's actually if you want to, like a social reference, in the 1980s, there was a Winnie the Pooh special called Too Smart for Strangers. And that teaches about kind of what we're talking about tonight, which is about stranger danger and if you believe it, in a Winnie the Pooh cartoon, touching. So it came out in 1984, but it's on YouTube, and I would strongly recommend it.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And if you can send a link to that to me, I will put that into the comments of this. So these videos are posted on YouTube. So if you're
Okay.
watching this live, then you can find it once it's posted. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then you can just go into the comments section and we'll link to that video. So that's really great advice. Thank you, Jeff. And Rich, on that topic as well, like in addition to doing like the social stories, and this is kind of like, that's kind of another example of like using social evidence or using a video to teach it. You also like can do role playing. So kids with autism, they tend to do best when things are taught in a very discrete way and giving them like very specific examples. So you want to not like use broad language, not make it really complicated. You want to just give very specific situations. So in the event, like you were to say, you role play and say, okay, you know, what would you do if this happens? And then you kind of give them multiple situations, like maybe list out 50 situations of, you know, how would you respond? Would you talk to this person? Yes, no. And you do want to differentiate between like the idea that, because kids with autism often are they think very black and white and very concretely. So the idea that if it's a police officer or it's a firefighter or it's a nurse or a doctor, that they should respond to that person. So you do want to make sure that you're teaching it that way, but role playing is a really, really good teaching strategy with that as well. So, but at 3, this is something that a child probably wouldn't understand, any child understand at 3. You know, by 5, they may start to understand that. But again, it's going to depend on the child specifically, because a child who is 5, who has autism, oftentimes, even so autism is a developmental disorder, meaning it changes over a person's lifetime. But many times children are delayed in terms of like their chronological age versus their developmental age at that age, meaning so by the time a child's 5, chronologically, developmentally, their brain may not have developed the way a 5-year-old's brain would have developed. They may not have the skills that a 5-year-old typically would have yet. And it doesn't mean they're not going to learn them, but it may take more time. So this may be, even if you're having this conversation with your 5-year-old typical child, it may not be that you're having that conversation at 5 with your autistic child. And so, and that's hard. I think it's one of the hardest things for a parent is the fact that your child may not be able to tell you what's happening. So I think that's why it's just really, really important to make sure you're with your child is only around people that you trust, and even in school that you're very active in participating in school to make sure their experience is good. You're aware of who he's interacting with in school, who his teachers are, and you're building that trust, because that's a really important, important thing. And therapists and teachers, they should never be alone with your child. A therapist should never be in a room alone with a child. As someone who works with kids, I've been doing it for 13 years. I have never in 13 years ever been alone in a room with a child. If a parent, doesn't want to be there, I personally won't work with them because it's just not appropriate. So a therapist really should always be with someone else. And even in a school setting, if your child has, for example, being pulled out for speech therapy or pulled out for occupational therapy, they should either be in a room with a glass window where people can look in, or even an open door, sitting in an area where people can see them from the hallway, or there should be another person in the room. And especially now with COVID, they are having more restrictions about other people being in the room, or just video cameras. That would be the only exception to times when there physically couldn't be someone present, where I said, okay, well, I'm only willing to do this in the event that this is recorded, because you want to make sure for everyone's protection that everything that's happening is safe. So it may be more like, Rich, what you're doing rather than what your child is understanding for a fairly significant period of time. This is something that probably most autistic children by 5 will not be able to understand. Some will, but most kids at that age won't. It's going to take longer. So you're going to need to take more precautions as a parent to really make sure that your child is safe. So is anyone else, anyone here part of the panel, or even parents that just want to give advice? Anyone want to unmute and share? I think this has become very much a conversational forum.
Jessica, so with everything that we've been talking about and stuff, like you were saying about how you were saying about developmentally and then your age-wise, like how it could go in hand. For me, like growing up, that's how it pretty much was for me, where a lot of times developmentally it took me longer. So with my parents, it took a little bit more time-wise to like be able to start explaining to me the kind of the stuff that like with those kind of stuff. And especially in middle school when I was in a social skills program, that which if you guys don't know already, like my speech language therapist in my middle school years created a social skills program, which all the students living with disabilities were in that program. And I was pulled out once a week for that. And with that program, like one of the things was talking about with strangers and stuff. So we were doing a lot of role playing and stuff with situations like that, where, you know, always stay by a trusted adult, which includes your parents and teachers and staff and anything else that, you know, that goes in play with that, someone that you know. And I know for me, my parents can be protective of me and stuff. That's for sure. And, but yeah, for me, yes, it took some time and it's different for everyone. So, but yeah, just to stay with a trusted adult. That's definitely the most important in this.
Yeah, absolutely, Michelle. And really social skills groups and social skills training should be every child who has autism should be part of that. Because the reality of it is that, and I think a lot of the panelists have said, is that what they wish they had more than academic education is really how to respond socially. So that's something that every child, I think, who's autistic should be part of. Unfortunately, it's a little harder today than it was 8 months ago to do that with COVID. Like there's not as many social groups meeting, but even there are social groups meeting via Zoom. So that's something to look into. And then even again, in the event that you're not able to meet people face to face right now, or kids are not in school right now, kids are suffering from the lack of that specific type of education. There are a lot of social skills curriculums, and I'll put I'll link to a few of them in the comments of this video, but there's a few good ones that you can use to teach these things to your child as well. That way you don't have to recreate the wheel. The stories will be there, the role plays will be there, so people have developed these things. So does anyone else have anything to add? I know Aidan, Kevin, Rachel, I know you wanted to join us tonight. Rachel Hawkins is here. She's a guest panelist, and she may not want to come out on this topic, but if she has anything to add, Jesse, anything you guys want to add before we move on to the next question?
Well, I think it's important to understand, to help children understand that not all strangers are terrible. And meaning that I worry that that your son could hear about strangers and think, I don't know this person, so they must be bad news, and explain what's an appropriate type of stranger interaction and what could be more ominous, such as someone they don't know saying, hi, have a great day, or hey, I like your Halloween costume. That's very much innocuous, meaning innocent. But when someone asks, hi, where do you live? Are your parents around? And a lot of questions that only a true friend that they know would ask, then that's a little bit more suspicious. And a child should trust their instincts. And when someone is making them uncomfortable, they have the right to get themselves out of that situation, even if that person is an adult. And also teach them stranger danger through the Bernstein Bear books, Trouble with Strangers. That's also a good learning tool. It's what taught me as a very young child. And but in all honesty, the most threatening things have come from not strangers, but from people I know quite well, meaning my classmates, who either tricked me into making a fool of myself, who pretended to be my best friend, to take advantage of me, and basically create lasting. You should just teach them in general about what we call red flags, such as when somebody you barely know suddenly acts like they're your best friend, and you're thinking, who the hell are you, and what have you done with this other person? Then there's oftentimes a hidden agenda. And that does happen to me on Facebook. Whenever obscure acquaintance, talks to me like they're my best friend all of a sudden after not speaking to me for years, they usually get down to business, and the conversation extends to, can you lend me $200 and I'll pay you back?
Yeah, and you bring up a great point, Jesse. And Richard, is something you do really want to keep in mind is that you do have to really make sure you're doing these role plays and examples, and you're not just teaching stranger danger, but you are teaching that there are adults you want to interact with and adults you don't want to interact with. Because the reality of it is that oftentimes children with autism, they do tend to overgeneralize. So if you teach them one thing, they might overgeneralize it to every situation. The last thing, God forbid, you would want is in the event there's an emergency, let's say, God forbid, like a house fire, and then a firefighter were to come into the home and try to help your child to run away and think they're a stranger. So that's something, and that's happened before, unfortunately. We know of things where people have gotten hurt because they did not respond to an adult. So it's really teaching that differentiation between both of them.